Hello, everyone. I think it is 7 o'clock, and I think we should kick off our presentation. My name is Lisa Leary. I am a volunteer and consultant at PARE. And for those of you who don't know, PARE stands for Plymouth Area Renewable Energy Initiatives. The home office is on Highland Street in Plymouth. And this event today is part of PARE's annual meeting series. The annual meeting theme this year is Many Sides of PARE. You can see that in the slide on the screen. And the goal with Many Sides of PARE was to offer people lots of opportunities through the whole week to experience PARE by going to events and workshops and doing some hands-on volunteer stuff. And ultimately to really better understand how PARE supports the community sustainability goals. So that's what brings us here today. A couple of things before we start is this event is free of charge. We wanted to make it accessible to everyone. But if you love it and you're in a position where you can make a donation, that would be greatly appreciated. And at the end of the presentation, we'll put a link in the chat box that will take you to a page where you can make a donation if you choose. This presentation is built with time at the end to answer questions. So if you have questions, please hold them to the end. And at that point, you can put them in the chat box or you can raise your hand, but we will attend to the questions at the end. And our speaker has generously said that if she runs out of time to answer questions, that she would email you and follow up, which is quite generous. So there'll be plenty of time to get all your questions answered. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm very happy to welcome our speaker, Laura Richardson, who is a master gardener and is going to be here to talk to us, to help us plan for planting.
Excellent. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. I'm incredibly honored to be part of PARE's week of their annual meeting and to share what I can about planting, gardening. It's something that I have loved for a long, long time, and I'm always happy to share with people. So this is a pretty content-rich slide here, and there are a lot of content-rich slides. I'm going to go through things quickly, but I think it will all build on itself. And I have minimized the pictures of you. So I know there are a lot of people on who I know dearly and love, and greetings to you all. And there are other people I don't know yet. And I am very excited that you're part of this also. So real quickly, my bio is that my mom was a gardener, and my dad's work back in the early 70s had a garden plot. And, and so even when I was little, I was playing in the dirt. And my first house in Nashua, I built an herb and perennial gardens, and then got involved with the Master Gardener program with the Cooperative Extension in 1999. I worked on the info line, which I loved, helping people figure out their issues and problems. My husband and I moved north, off grid, making our own solar, and I did a lot of home-based jobs and projects. The soil there was really different from down in Nashua. Up here at our place, it's very sandy, very gravelly, south-facing, steep hillsides, not the same as an in-town kind of property. But I brought a lot of my perennials and the blueberry bushes. I brought a lot of stuff up with me and started building gardens. And that was fun, but frustrating. We didn't have much water pressure with our system. And so that was a little bit of a challenge. In 2008, I started working in Concord on sustainable energy issues. They were long days, exciting work, but I really didn't have the energy to work on gardens after that. And so the gardens went feral. The combination of no water pressure, aggressive weeds, really awful soil, washed away all the organic material that I had put in. It was a real mess. And so the stress plus the long commute, it was about 72 miles each way, plus the messy gardens was not a healthy combo for me. And I really missed getting my hands dirty. So I left that scene in autumn of 2016 to start a new chapter focused on my physical and mental health. And in 2017, after decades of dreaming, we built the Veg Mahal, which is a new outbuilding for us. And that's for year-round veggie and fruit growing, winter storage, and there are a whole lot of new gardens around it. And we built all of this for the long term. Okay, so this was a long time dream, and with the long-term goal of working this. So we now have a year-round greenhouse, a big veggie garden, perennial veggie garden, medicinal garden, perennials, containers, and we're working on a forest garden style orchard. Plus we have nut trees and bushes that are coming along. So this is what we do now. So this is a picture of the feral garden. It looks really pretty, sort of if you squint your eyes or take your glasses off, it looks pretty. But as soon as you get close to it, you know that it's all weeds and a really high-end condo for chipmunks and such. So our personal goals, my husband and I, our goals in context, we wanted to significantly improve our physical and mental health. And we wanted to do that by working together on projects that we find meaningful, sustainable, and fun. Those are three really important things for us. We want to eat a diet of mostly plants, mostly homegrown, year-round, in climate zone 4A, which is pretty cold. We want to reduce single-use plastic in our life. And we want to learn about, experiment, and share what we learn with anyone interested, anyone. So here's a picture of a salad. This was on our holiday card this year, but all of this came out of the Veg Mahal. And this picture here was a potluck. We went to see my mom for the first time in almost a year and brought a salad for that with all sorts of yummy stuff in it. So, so year-round, we're doing pretty garden salads. So today's goals are to teach you some good garden planning techniques and to have realistic expectations. I want to encourage you to have fun growing beautiful and edible, if you want edible plants anywhere, large or small, and not to be stressed about it. To give you some new approaches to getting your hands dirty, and to avoid repeating my mistakes. So the first thing you need to figure out is about the site, and you've got to do this before anything else. And you can grow anywhere, but you need to figure out what the site will allow. Okay, so first of all, if you don't own the property, you need to ask permission, or you need to find property where you can garden. Or do container gardens where you are. So you can partner with friends or join community gardens. Those are around. You can grow plants in containers if you don't own the property. But I want you to really understand the site for access to the sun, water, and you. You know, the garden plot we had when I was a little kid, it was about 15 miles away. And so we had to get all of our stuff in the car. And there was some real work involved in doing that, although it was fun. So you need full sun. 6 to 8 hours is recommended in bright sun, or longer if it's dappled light, preferably not directly in front of a south-facing building. And that's because plants bake without good air circulation. So if you've got plants right up against the house in containers even, they could dry out, they could fry. I call it baking. Please take note of prevailing winds. Some plants that are really delicate can get damaged. Where we live, we have winds all the time, except on the hot August days when you really want a wind. And so for us, we know that we have the winds, and so the plants either have to get strong really quickly or they're not going to make it. I have a very Darwinian approach to a lot of this. So for me, this is really important. Any gardens I work on need to be near a bathroom. with the chair in the shade and drinking water. So water is also really important. Most people are recommended to use drip irrigation because it is targeted, it's the least wasteful, and it's not cheap to set up a system, but it is really the best way environmentally to address irrigation. But you need water pressure, and we have never had good water pressure. So all of our systems are set up right now with sprinklers, and we elevate them on chimney tiles to get them up above the plant material so that it then rains down on them. And it doesn't do damage. You know, a sprinkler right next to a plant is going to do a lot of damage. It's just going to tear the leaves apart. Sprinklers also cover a lot of area. I recommend that you only irrigate in the morning, and that's to avoid overnight and fungal bacterial problems that grow when you're sleeping. Also, if you irrigate at night or the soil is still really moist from irrigating in the evening, the hungry nighttime critters come out and they dig for slugs and grubs. And we've lost a lot of plants because we've done that. And that's a lesson I have learned several times. So I recommend that you learn it from me and don't repeat that, because it can be a real mess. Water deep enough for the roots and the surrounding area to get wet, but not muddy, and then let the ground dry out to encourage root growth. So if you just water a little bit every day, then the roots are going to be really shallow, and you want them to go deep because that's how they're a little bit more resilient. After irrigating, this can be hard, but after irrigating, do not walk in the area or weed it, as that will compact the soil and it will make things a little messy. Let the water gradually sink into the soil. If you're using containers, then use a watering can or a bottle, and you'll need to do that pretty much every day in the heat of the summer. So another resource that you're going to need to have on hand will be tools. These are tools that I like. This is set up in the Veg Mahal building, our new outbuilding, and everything's organized, and I really like that. You need to know where your tools are going to be stored, and preferably it'll be near the work area. You also want to have access to compost, to mulch, to plants, and to seeds. So these are my favorite tools. The orange gloves, they're nitrile, but they breathe, and they hold up they hold up forever, pretty much. And I've got a couple of pair that, you know, when I do get them wet, I can trade them out. But these are the tools that I really love. Clean soil is really important. We always recommend, master gardeners always recommend that you test your soil before starting on a garden. You want to test for nutrient levels, pH, and organic material, because you don't want too much of anything in a garden. Even, you know, it seems like more is better, but you can really do damage to plants if you have too much nutrition in there, or even too much organic material. And you want to avoid having a garden in the ground, in the soil, for edibles if it's near old buildings, because lead paint stays in that soil for 2,000 or more years. You want to, if it's near busy roads, you want to be really cognizant that there could be toxins in the soil from the exhaust. Old orchards historically used lead and arsenic and other nastiness in their pesticides. And, you know, if there were non-organic fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides used even last year on, you know, lawn, for example, you want to be kind of careful of that if you're going to be eating the food coming out of that. And if you aren't confident about the cleanliness of the soil, you need to opt for containers or elevated beds. That's my recommendation. Also, avoid reusing old painted or pressure treated lumber. Again, because if you're going to eat this, you want it to be safe. I also recommend that people avoid foundation plantings. Now, this goes against the grain of every, I don't know, almost everybody out there. We have rock and bluestone that goes right up against our foundations, and it just makes things easier to maintain. And we don't really have the fire danger that they have out west. But you know, if you have plantings right next to your house and it's fall and there's leaf matter underneath and that all catches on fire, well, your house could go up really quickly. So that's an issue. Critters might hang out there, the good, the bad, the ugly. And the drip line off your roof, you could have ice, hail, or snow damage to anything underneath it. The big thing from an building energy perspective is moisture management. And with drainage, you don't want your sills or your siding to rot out or invite carpenter ants in. And you certainly don't want your basement to flood. So all of that can happen if you've got an ever increasing pile of yummy moisture holding loam up against your building. It gets taller and taller, the leaves and the plants get closer and closer, and it basically creates a very moist environment. And you don't want that for your house. Money is, to be clear, this should be one of the first slides. I should have put this first. Be honest with yourself about what your budget is for your garden, what you can accomplish with the money. And if you can't, if you don't have a big budget, that's fine. There are other ways to deal with things. There are a lot of free cycle opportunities, but you may wind up with things that you're not ready to use, you know, that are free, or you don't really want. So it's sort of a challenge to go through it when you're trying not to spend too much on things. So what I recommend is that you spread out your goals over a few years and learn along the way. So what I'm about to show you in this slide deck, we've been working on, Gil and I have been working on this for, you know, the past 30 years. So I'm hoping that you will have some realistic objectives and baseline answers to these baseline questions. What do you want to grow and why? That's really the biggest question. You know, once you figure out where your site is, you need to know what you want to grow and why, and will it grow in your spot, and how long-term a commitment will this be? For us, it's about year-round veggies and fruit. So here are some pictures. All of these photos are from our, well, there are 2 photos that are not, but everything else is from the work that we've done. Those are, so you need to know where you're going to store everything, you know? So if you're growing potatoes, here I am out in the harvesting potatoes at the end of the season, where are those things going to go? They need to be in a cool, cold, moist spot, and our house would not be appropriate for that. So a root cellar is great. A basement would be great. And then the other big question is, what will the garden look like off season, and will that be a problem? Then what kind of site is it? You know, anything will work. You just need to know what it is and what to expect from it. So a grassy lawn seems like the ideal because it's flat. We have a gravel hillside and we have a lot of rocks. And so we have basically, over these last 25, 30 years, worked hard to figure out how to get as much production out of our gardens, our space as possible. And at this point, we can realistically maintain it. We've learned a lot of tricks of the trade, if you will, on how to approach things so that we don't have as much work to do, even though we have a much bigger garden. And if it's a veggie garden, which we're going to focus a lot on, if it's a veggie garden, you need to make sure that there is space to rotate the crops each year. That's really important, because otherwise, after a couple of years, you're going to have problems. How much time do you have to consistently commit to your garden? And will someone help you? To be clear, I could not do all of this myself. Here's a picture of Gil and me, and we are being silly. But he's an amazing partner in all of this, and I couldn't do it without him. And the other thing is he's happy to do some of the chores that I don't like doing or I'm not as good at. And so so it's important to have a partner, you know, partner like Gil, or a dear friend, or a friend who will become a dear friend. All of that really helps out. You need to know where the garden waste is going to go. So at the end of the season, you know, you're going to have a big pile of dead plant material, and you need to have a pile where, you know, where is that going to go? Hopefully it's not just going to go to the landfill, right? Because that would just create methane. We don't want that. But you need to have a plan for that. You also have to be aware of your neighbors and what their expectations and needs are. So for example, I know a guy who lives in a pretty high-end neighborhood, very fancy historic homes. Everybody's got, you know, lawn services and everything. And he's gone to the other extreme and just let everything go. It's a big jungle. And that has created a lot of strife. So I don't recommend that. I think there's always a happy medium on things. So just be aware of what's going on with your neighbors. The question about fencing is a really big one. Where we are, it makes no sense to fence because it's too big a property. It's too much on a hill. We have so many critters already in the area. Our approach on that really is to create enough of an environment for them to like other places better than our gardens. And somehow, knock on wood, we've managed to deal with that. The other really important realistic objective and question is about mobility. And so as we're building our gardens, we're really focused on our long-term health and whether or not we're going to have issues. So we can get to our gardens without steps from the house. We can zip around if we had to in different ways. There are a lot of terraces, but there's access to all of them. And so that's something to keep in mind. Similarly, if we suddenly became very busy doing other things, we need to have a plan as to how to deal with the gardens to let it go. The new forest garden orchard that we're working on, once that is set up, that should be able to take care of itself and really shouldn't need that much intervention other than harvesting from us, which is, I think, a pretty cool idea. But the veggie garden, if we were to be away for a long period of time, we would really need to have a plan as to how to secure that so that the soil would stay good and the weeds wouldn't take over and go feral again, like that early slide. So quick definition, because I think everybody should remember that there are different kinds of plants, annuals, biennials, and perennials. Some people just toss the words around, and I don't want to make assumptions for anybody here. So an annual is one that grows 1 year and then it dies. And you need to pull it out and compost it. So examples would be tomatoes, petunias, marigolds, basil. Some annuals are perennials in warmer climates, like tomatoes. They can go on for a while, I think. I've never experienced that, but it's a cool idea. Biennials grow over 2 years. The first year is leaves and roots, and the second year is flowers to set seed. So examples there, carrots, mullein, which is considered a weed by some, and parsley. Carrots will grow that second year, but they start getting really hairy and woody. All their energy goes from that root that they developed the first year, goes into shooting up flower head which looks like parsley. When that goes to seed, they're related. And then it will make seeds and drop, and it will die. Some of those seeds, if it's not a hybrid carrot, some of those seeds will create new plants, which that could be cool. But oftentimes it doesn't. Anyway, perennials are plants that come back every year. They stay true to form. They get bigger over time. So examples there, daylilies. There's a picture here of a daylily, and mint. I find the secret to our gardens to be mulch. It's pretty magical. And so this picture is of a big, our old orchard, and it's covered with dandelions, and that makes a fantastic mulch, as long as you mow it and collect it, collect it and spread it right away. Don't let it all heat up, because that gets really explosive and stinky. But you want to collect it, fluff it up on the garden beds, make it 3 to 6 inches deep as a solid blanket. And the dandelions, even though it may sound like this makes no sense, they can be a really great mulch. There's a lot of nutrition in those dandelion plants. So mulch will keep the soil moist and cool. It keeps the weed seeds from landing and germinating on bare soil. Weeds that do grow are easier to extract or harvest. So for example, Gil and I weeded our asparagus bed of crabgrass day before yesterday. It took us about 5 minutes to do. And that's I think probably a 5 by 12 bed. If we did not have that covered in grass clipping mulch or dandelion mulch, it would have taken an hour at least. So a heavy layer of mulch that will last throughout the winter. Fantastic stuff. So mulch also stops the transfer of soil bacteria from splashing onto plants. You can, well, that sort of makes sense. So when it rains, or when you've got your sprinkler going, water splashes on the soil. There's all sorts of interesting stuff going on in the soil. And if that splashes onto the plants, then you wind up with disease issues. Mulch also keeps the soil from blowing away or from getting muddy. And to me, it looks a whole lot nicer. So there are all different types of gardens, and we're going to cover all of this in the next 35 minutes or so. Containers and hanging baskets, in-ground beds, hugelkultur mounds and trenches, mostly on trenches, elevated beds, rock gardens, and raised beds. So this is a picture. This is not necessarily the most attractive garden that we have, but it's a perennial vegetable garden, and I'm really jazzed about this idea that vegetables can grow year-round, every year. I don't have to tear them out and replace them. So I'm learning about all of that. And I've got other plants staged around it that are either waiting to be planted elsewhere and they're just in containers, or that's where they're growing because that's the spot for them. So, okay, so containers and hanging baskets must have holes in the bottom of them. They need to drain out. If you don't have a hole in the bottom, it will supersaturate, it'll overflow of water, and the whole plant will rot, and you don't want that. You've just spent time and money for those plants. You want to use high quality potting soil for containers. There are cheapy ones out there, and cheap is as cheap does. So you really, if you're going to invest in something, put your money in the potting soil. At the end of the season, this sounds counterintuitive, but just dump that soil someplace where you could use pretty good soil. Compost those plants. If you don't have a place to put that soil, then you can put it in the compost, and it will just add to the nutrient value there. You want to fertilize a couple of times during the year, and do that on gray days, because otherwise you're going to burn the plants, burn the leaves, and you don't want to do that. For the most part, containers and hanging baskets should be annuals, because to store them over the winter, it would take up a lot of space. We do have some that we keep in containers, but we have the place dedicated for it. Plus frozen containers, if they're outside, they can crack. So if you're storing them outside, store them empty and upside down or on their sides. Just learned this new helpful hint that, you know, you do need a hole in the bottom of the hanging basket, but line the bottom with a paper coffee filter. I think that's a pretty cool idea. Sometimes the holes are really big and all the soil falls out. You want to mulch with either wood chips or grass clippings to help retain the moisture, keep the roots cool, keep the weeds out. I try to avoid dark colored containers because they bake the roots. A lot of times when you buy containers, they'll be black because the combination of the green leaves and the pink flowers or what have you, with the black container, it looks really sharp, but I think it bakes everything. Most veggies, flowers, and herbs can do well in containers. Deadheading flowers, that's when the flower is basically dead. Clip it off, pinch it off after it's prime, and that will encourage more flowers. So again, it sounds a little counterintuitive, but really, you know, or even harvesting flowers for bouquets or for your salads really makes a big difference on how lush the plants will be. And get in a routine early about watering these containers. Learn the density of the container when it's really wet and when it's really dry, so that you don't overwater it and you certainly don't let it dry out altogether. If containers are on the balcony, this is really important, again, neighborly stuff, with neighbors below, or like if you're storing things underneath it, just be aware that you're not overwatering those containers and that, you know, water is dribbling down on top of others. So here are some pictures of containers at our place. The first on the left is sort of a traditional container gardens with the pink, blue, yellow. I like that combination a lot. So that's just near our entryway. Containers are not just for summertime. So here, the middle container has some branches we cut off from the Christmas tree and some sumac, the staghorn sumac, tucked in the frozen soil. And I thought that looked kind of pretty that year. The third one on the right is not a container that I built at all. They were mums that came from the garden center. It was sort of an impulse buy, but I got a couple of those and a couple pumpkins and some corn stalks, and that was a real easy way to dress up an area for autumn. So that all counts as containers and gardening. The hanging baskets on the left here are there to mark a spot so people don't drive down our driveway and back into the garden. So that's just a visual cue in the rear view mirror. The middle picture here of these containers, these are broccoli plants that are growing on our porch. So here's the thing about porch growing. There is a tree in front of the porch, so it's dappled light. And then there's the screen, and the combination of the dappled light plus the screen meant that not much sun came into the porch. We wanted the broccoli on the porch because the bleeping groundhog kept eating the broccoli. And so we avoided having a problem with that, but we didn't actually get any broccoli out of that anyway, because it just didn't get enough sun. The picture on the far right is a really cool setup that Gardener Supply has come up with a grow bag that, and then a trellis inside it. And so that's a combination, again, for small areas to really produce a lot. I think this is a really nifty setup. We do not have any of these, but it's a really cool idea. So that's tomatoes with, I think, probably basil growing in there. In-ground gardens, this is sort of the traditional, what you think of when you're gardening. This is in our dooryard, and we knew the soil was really good here, so there wasn't a need to build it up. But over the last 20 years, we keep adding mulch, you know, the grass clippings every year, and that breaks down into amazing soil. So this is an aesthetic priority for us, and even when everything else in the gardens went feral, this was always an area that we cared about as a priority. And so then these are pictures over the years. The big photo on the right with the purple chives, there are a couple of milkweed plants in there, which I love. That's my favorite fragrance. But unfortunately, some of the seeds were released. We'll talk about this in a little bit. Some of the seeds were released, and the next year, the garden was filled with milkweed plants. And so that's the picture on the lower left-hand side, just chock-a-block with milkweed. And I'll talk with how to deal with that in a bit. So hugelkultur is sort of a new technique that's been brought on the scene. And this is a really cool way to address plants that might not be able to get a lot of attention all of the time, because so you're building in nutrition. We've got these teeny little American mountain ash we got from the New Hampshire State Nursery. They're, I don't know, 3 or 4 inches high when we got them. And there are 10 of them. And we knew that we wanted a hedge along this very steep hillside. And we knew that we wouldn't really be able to irrigate them or give them much attention. And so we dug a trench. We buried non-fruit tree branches and wood, and non-fruit tree branches and wood because we don't want cherry with black knot and we don't want apple with scab. So we don't want to introduce problems. So these are trees that we had on the property. And then we layered with leaves and grass clippings and other organic material. We covered the whole thing with decent loam. We watered it in. It was a lot of work. You can see Gil here. He's still smiling now. Then we added more loam. Then we planted and we mulched. So that's what we did. Here's pictures of that in action. And we also have some hugelkultur mounds for nut trees, but those photos are hard to visually understand. These, I think, make more sense visually. And so here's what it looks like when it's done. And you can see the grade stakes are marking out where the little whips go, the little bushes. And here's one of them that I took a picture of this just this past week. It survived last year's drought, which was terrible, and these guys didn't get much water at all. And they're now about 6 inches tall, and eventually, again, we're in this for the long run, eventually they'll be about 10 feet by 10 feet, and it'll be a big fruiting hedge. So then we talk about elevated beds, which is another route to go. This is in our greenhouse, but most of these elevated beds are built and designed to be outside. I think this is a great idea because it's so ergonomic and it's fantastic to go into this space and not have to bend over, not have to get on my hands and knees to maintain everything. But the deal is, once they're in position, they're there for the duration. These things are here for the next, I don't know, 30, 40 years, however long I'm alive. They were not cheap. Go for quality because they're going to be there for a long time. They come with instructions and you need to follow them very, very carefully. I see this as heat mass in the greenhouse, which makes me happy. But do not use pressure treated lumber for these beds, again, because you're eating out of them and you don't want to eat those chemicals. That's not good stuff. So the elevated beds, you need to set them up on really flat ground because if they're at all at an angle, it's just going to look weird. It's going to tweak the construction and then they won't stand up over time. So if they're really flat, you should be in good shape. You want to put hardware cloth on the bottom to keep critters out. You don't want critters burrowing in underneath. You know, it's okay to have the good critters that help with the soil, but you really want to try to keep the chipmunks, the mice out of there. Something like this, oh golly, they would just be in heaven. And then you want to layer with branches and leaves and compost, you know, a whole lot of different layers of things. And that will, like the hugelkultur, right? That will feed the soil for a long time. And we've been finding that this has been really, really exciting, really wonderful. At the end of the season, if this is outside, you want to pull the annual plants out. You want to clean everything out and cover the bed with a tarp or a sheet and let the soil dry out. Keep it covered over the winter. And the reason for that is if it freezes solid when it freezes solid as a block, if there's a lot of moisture in there, it's going to expand and then crack, and you don't want that to happen. So you want to make sure that it's relatively dry. In the spring, uncover the bed and gently water. And you can add some compost tea. That's compost in water. Let that sit for a little bit. Spread that on there and let that seep in. And then once the soil has really warmed, I don't plant anything vegetable-wise until the beginning of June. Then you can start planting again. And you may want to add more soil as it settles. That's sort of a given because all of that cool organic stuff that you've put in there is going to be breaking down and compressing a little bit over time. And so you'll just need to, you know, start dumping more potting soil or what have you in there. And so this is our greenhouse coming out of our fourth winter. You can see it's really lush, and we do not tear things out until they're truly dead. Things that I thought would die after a year or so have continued on. Our Swiss chard is in its third year now, which is really exciting. And the rosemary, the flowers, it's all very yummy. So we have a lot of rock gardens because we have a lot of rocks, and some of them are bigger than others. The important thing with rock gardens is to pick the right plants. We find that sedums and creeping phlox do really well. The creeping phlox is the pink and purple on the right, and that's actually where our blueberry bushes are also. So that combination works well for us. The creeping phlox sort of protects the base of the blueberry bushes. And then that's gone when the blueberry bushes are producing for us. It gets really hot and dry in these environments, and so you want to make sure that you've got some tough love plants there. And you need to be careful of critters because they are impossible to evict. We have tried everything and they just keep coming. So we've learned sort of to live with it. So raised beds, this is what people often think of as gardens. I think everything is gardens. I'm not going to judge anybody who wants to get their hands dirty. You're a gardener. So, so with the raised bed, you preferably want to have a flat area. You want to allow plenty of space between the beds so that you can comfortably maintain the beds. I like enough space so that I can sit down, I can turn around, I can be cross-legged and not have to worry about damaging anything. I do not have boards keeping these beds together because I know I'll get splinters, and so so these are just rounded up beds. But once a bed is in position, you want to keep it there for years. You want to let it stay there. And you don't want to step in the bed. You don't want to compact that soil. Let it be fluffy. And so this is how I build raised beds. First of all, no rototilling needed, right? Okay, so rototilling can do a lot of damage to the soil, and soil scientists are learning that what goes on underground is just, it's amazing. It's a whole different world. So rototilling damages the soil structure, and we want to keep that in place because there's all sorts of great stuff happening underneath the ground. We don't see it, but it's happening, I promise you. So you want to allow for the beneficial critters and the mycorrhizae, which that's a fungal network, to help you with the soil health. The mycorrhizae want to work, and so if you just let them do their work and not mess them up with the rototiller, it's fabulous. Rototilling also exposes weed seeds that might be buried deeper in the soil. And so then they have a great spot to germinate. You want to avoid that. Let those weed seeds stay down there. Eventually they'll rot away. You can avoid the hassle, the dust, the noise, the fumes, and the fossil fuels if you don't rototill. And then once you have your beds and you don't rototill, then you can dig plant-specific spots for plants or hoe a row for seeds. So this is how I do our raised beds. This is the soil that we had to start with. It's sandy, it's gravelly. That's our base layer. It's terrible for gardening. We asked our contractor to bring in some loam. He's a fabulous guy, but unfortunately it was end of season. It was November when he finally was able to get it to us. And so it was mostly clay, not what we wanted. We were pretty disturbed about it. But we learned that if we add some gypsum to it, that helps break up the clay and the roots will be able to break it up further. Then we had charcoal and we had wood ash because we burn wood for heat. And so we spread some of that. We bought some straw. We had lots of leaves, grass clippings, what you got, you know, anything organic. We put that down. Then cardboard, we covered every bit of this big garden, which is, I think it's 15 by 80. And we added really good topsoil, expensive topsoil. And then we shaped the beds. We made them narrow enough to maintain, but wide enough to be efficient. So we think about 4 feet across is a good distance with enough space, again, to sit or squat. Grass clippings for mulch, 4 to 6 inches deep, wood chips for paths, and we do that quickly. Then we plant, and then we keep adding grass clippings through the season, 3 to 6 inches at a time. So that's what we started with. That's what it looked like. It looks like a parking lot. That's the original soil, sandy gravel. There's the clay in the back with the loamier stuff that we wound up using elsewhere. We added all the gypsum, the leaves, the ash, the straw. That's the Vermont compost, really beautiful stuff. My cardboard collection, and then spreading the Vermont compost. So it's always good when you're doing this to wet the layers as you go. Everything sticks better. You get rid of the air pockets, doesn't fly away. We highly recommend don't use glossy cardboard, no color printing, no tape, no cellophane tape, and no staples. Avoid all of that. Just have straight up cardboard. There is some tape in here, but it's the paper tape, so we're not worried about that. So then we shape the beds. This is with the wood chips as the paths for the maintenance areas. And just a heads up, you know, the mulch, the grass clippings will decompose. That basically disappears, turns into nothing. The wood chips will decompose slowly. They'll get a little mushy. They'll have some very interesting fungal activity going on inside, including the mushrooms that pop up sometimes. Now, they're sometimes kind of gross looking, but when I see them, I'm excited because I know that there's that fungal activity going on underground, and that's making for a really good soil for the entire area. So here is a picture of the raised beds, and they're mulched. Depending on the time of the year, the area at the beginning when you saw all the dandelions, we call that our mulch farm. That may produce only a limited supply of clippings. So we prioritize which beds need the mulch when, and different beds get attention the next time. And it's better, it's so much better to make those layers really thick to block the soil from the sun and the weed seeds rather than sprinkling the mulch. You just don't want to sprinkle it because that's basically planting weeds. Okay, so you need to make sure that it's really thick. So here's a picture again of the garden, wood chips for the paths. And you might notice in some of these photos that a lot of times the chairs, which is in the sort of the left-hand side, chairs are upside down, and that's by design. So birds love to sit on things, and they don't only sit when they are on the chair. And so if you get my drift. And sometimes if it rains, you'll get a little puddle. If the pollen flies by, the pollen will, or dust will settle in the little puddle, and then it'll dry out and you wind up with a dirty chair. So when you flip it upside down, you don't have any of those problems. And then when you need a chair, it's there, you flip it over, easy peasy. So one other interesting thing about this photo is that there are 2 moose in it. I took a picture of the garden because it was really cool looking. And then lo and behold, there are 2 moose. So I don't know, can you see the moose? Kind of cool. And they did not bother the garden at all. Okay, so here's the raised beds again. And then in winter, again, make sure you know what things are going to look like in the winter and that you're okay with that. So refreshing a garden, here again is the milkweed in our dooryard garden. This is the garden with the great soil originally, and it got overwhelmed, as we say, by an exuberant teenager's milkweed dispersal. I'm sure you all have an image right now of what that's all about. And so we're starting the whole process over again with layering. First, I harvested the pods to spread elsewhere, and I composted the material, but then leaves went down, more cardboard, sawdust because we had it, and this is what it looks like right now. And the goal is later this month and the beginning of June, I will start planting for this coming year. Because we've added so much stuff with carbon in it, and you need a carbon nitrogen ratio in order to make the soil really work and have the pH in the right area. I'll be adding what's called nitrogen fixing plants to the garden this year, so that'll help balance things out. So real quickly, rotating crops for vegetables, really, really important, because if you don't, at the end of the growing season, the pests and diseases will have found the plants that they prefer. And then they will, the next year, they will just wreak havoc and it'll be a mess. So every year you need to move the plants to stay ahead of them and confuse them. And I like to incorporate edible flowers for beauty, to attract pollinators, to distract the bad guys and add yumminess. So rotating crops, you want to keep the distinct families together or really far apart if you save seeds. So there are 3 main families that you have to think about. The nightshades with tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and potatoes. Brassicas, which are broccoli and cabbages, and cucurbits, which are cucumbers, squash, and melons. So they're distinct families, and I do my best to keep all of them kind of together, and then move them kind of together. That's the goal. And every year I try something new. This year it's going to be gourds and pumpkins. So here's how I rotate the crops in the veggie bed. All right, so this is the first year, 2018. The blue circle goes around the tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers. And that's on the left-hand side. The pink circle is around the potatoes. I had to plant the potatoes on that side of the garden because that's where the soil was deeper and they're root crops. So I had put all the root crops together initially. But my goal was long-term to get them all together and move them in a cycle throughout. On the far left, you see resting soil, and that's because we kind of ran out of that really beautiful Vermont compost and didn't want to budget for more. And so I spent the year just adding lots of organic material, leaves and grass clippings, building that up. So that was 2018. 2019, they sort of got swapped, but they didn't really. It's kind of confusing, but but they moved so that they're not in the same place. And then last year, yay, they finally moved together. So now they're a unit, and the soil is consistently beautiful throughout the whole garden. This coming year, 2021, they will be moving further to what we see as the left, further to the east. And then in 2022, they'll move back over to the far right. And so that's rotating crops, and everything else moves with them pretty much. And I incorporate a lot of other stuff so that there are no monocultures throughout. I hope that makes sense to everyone. So we're almost done here. A couple words about mint, because this is really important. Mint spread. Sometimes they cross-pollinate and self-hybridize, which is really infuriating. The stems are squarish, so that's how you can tell them apart. And there are a lot of different plants that are part of the mint family. In 2007, we planted a bank with what we thought was oregano, and it looked great, tasted yummy, and somehow it cross-pollinated with mint, and we wound up with oregament. And we still have oregament, and it's gone all over the place. It's in the woods. It's just everywhere, and it stinks. It's not good for spaghetti sauce, and it's not good for tea. It's disgusting. So please don't repeat that problem. And so when you have the flowers of the mint or oregano, cut those flowers off as soon as you see them, and that will keep them from cross-pollinating. And keep them in containers, because mints also can move by roots. Weeds are opportunistic. They work really hard to take over, but they also seek out and bring minerals to the surface. So the plant down on the lower right-hand side, that's burdock, and that will have a root that will just go on forever and ever, and it's impossible to pull out. And you don't want to trash your whole garden trying to get that root out. Turns out those leaves and the leaves of the other plants here that we have, mullein and evening primrose, and now I'm forgetting what that one is. But anyway, those leaves all have really great nutrition in them that if you just sort of cut with scissors or saw off, if you saw those leaves off and lay them down as mulch, they will add nutrition to the soil. It will then decompose and filter down. Doing that repeatedly will exhaust the plant and not you, and improve the nutrient composition of your soil. Some weeds are edible or useful. And all of that is to say, crabgrass is an entirely different evil creature. And that has to be really carefully extracted with all of its running roots. That just goes everywhere. And if you break roots off on that, it will still keep coming back. It'll keep popping up. Other hints to avoid stress. For me, when in doubt, cut it out. If it's diseased, if it's infested, if it pokes you in the face or makes you mad or you don't like it, just get rid of it. Again, I'm pro-Darwin, and I have very limited patience for things that make me angry. So you also want to avoid the monoculture. So you don't want to plant one thing in one row by itself. You want to add other things, add flowers. So Gil and I have these nighttime get to sleep games that we play by ourselves, the alphabet game. And so we were really excited, zucchini and zinnias, when we're getting to the end of the alphabet game. But we have marigolds everywhere, daylilies as borders, whole lot of different beautiful, colorful, and edible plants. I recommend that you start small and know and learn what works for you and what does not. Some plants will be really easy to grow and some impossible. Do not take it personally when there's a plant failure. It happens. For example, I don't even bother growing corn anymore. So weed a little bit on a regular basis. Otherwise, it's no fun at all. hang out and enjoy your garden as often as possible and have a blast with it. And I thank you so much for your patience, for your attention. I'm happy to take questions for as long as you want. And if you have questions after the fact and you want to get in touch with me, you can reach out to the folks here at Little Gardens, New Hampshire. Here's their email address and the Facebook link. So thank you so much.
Wow.
I'm going to have a sip of
I
tea.
have so many notes. That was a lot of information. Fantastic. Laura, we have questions for you.
Excellent. I'm going to go into the view where I can see everybody.
Yeah.
Thank
In
you
the
all.
meantime, Klutna is putting links in the chat box. One is we may not be able to get to all questions. If you go to our Little Gardens Facebook page, you can join the group, and that is an awesome place to put in questions and connect to all other community gardeners. We have all sorts of things published there, workshops, cooking shows, garden Q&A, so definitely check that out. And then if you want to make a donation, a link is coming up where you can go right to the page to make a donation to support programs like these. Okay, Laura, question.
Yes.
And I think you answered this one, but I'm going to say it again just in case. Do you keep mulch on the garden year round, or should you remove it and replace it like at certain intervals?
Yeah, that's a great question. I leave it on year round. I use the grass clippings and they basically break down to nothing throughout the gardens everywhere. I love grass clippings. And so we put them on 3 to 6 inches. We replenish that a couple of times throughout the year because they continue to break down. They compact, but they also are decomposing. And then by the spring, like right now in the veggie garden, the grass clippings are probably 1/4 of an inch thick. It's time to add more. And so a lot of people will clear that off just so that they have access to the beds. I don't find a need to do that.
Okay. Great, because that sounds like a lot of work to be removing it. What about using, the next question, what about using newspapers for mulch?
So newspaper will work. I find that it floats away. So grass clippings don't, we live in a really breezy place. The breezy is kind. It's very windy. And so newspaper basically just dries out and it blows away. If you can keep it all padded down, then sure. And, it'll break down, but I'm more a fan of cardboard, loam, plants, grass clippings.
This next question, I think a lot of people can relate to is, can you mulch with pine needles or pine needles mixed in with your leaves?
So that's a great question. Pine needles mixed in with leaves and grass clippings would work great. Pine needles would have, they're really carbon dense and they're very acidic. And so we put pine needles and our old garland from the holidays, we put that on the blueberry bushes, and that works great for blueberry bushes. Pine needles are also prickly, and so I like softer things because I usually wear a skirt when I'm gardening, and so having pine needles poke me, that would make me angry, and I would do something about that.
Okay. Where did you get, this is another question, where did you get the compost and wood chips?
So the compost, the original, I got directly from Vermont Compost. We had a truckload brought in, not cheap. The loam that we have brought in comes from our neighbor 2 doors down, and he has some kind of barter deal with a farmer friend to clear out his cow barn. And our friend Ed mixes it with sand that he has on his site. So he makes it for us. It all sits for a while, and we get a couple loads as we're building new gardens. But once they're built, they're built. And then wood chips, we again have a neighbor who is a logger and does tree service work. So he's chipping stuff all the time. And he brings us a couple of loads each year to freshen things up. Sort of our way to help put money in the local economy.
Let's see. Were those animal traps by the raised beds? Which animals? Oh, am I reading that right? Yeah.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I'm not sure I understand it. It says, were those animal traps by the raised beds? Which animals?
No animal traps.
Yeah.
So we've gone around and around, you know, we're not hunters. And so it's really tough when we have a critter problem. We will defend the blueberry bushes to the end. And so, but you know, pretty much everything else, and that's because the chipmunks don't care. They're just everywhere. But everybody else, we sort of have resigned ourselves that they've got a place to live. We're in their territory more than they're in ours. And so, you know, we just try to have a really good environment for them to be in their natural state so that they will eat their natural stuff. There is some browse from deer on our fruit trees. We just have to live with that. And we have to hope that they don't just nibble everything all the way down to the ground. They haven't so far.
I like that. We're in their habitat.
Yeah.
You know, encroaching on theirs. Here's another question. After putting down the cardboard, how much soil do you put on top? This
Great question.
How the roots get through.
Yeah, so one layer of cardboard breaks down relatively quickly, and it does a great job of blocking out whatever's underneath it. So, you know, if you have grass like a lawn and you put some leaves on top of that with the cardboard on top, and then loam on top of that and grass clippings on top of that, the cardboard will break down in 3 months. You know, I planted potatoes on top of the cardboard with about 3 inches of that really good Vermont compost on top of it. As you got to the other side of the garden where we ran out, it was pretty thin, but all that cardboard's gone. I mean, that was gone pretty quickly.
Okay, so just breathing soil on top.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love cardboard. We have a friend who says that I have a fetish of cardboard.
Someone wants to know what you did last year regarding the drought.
Yeah, I swore a lot. So we targeted where we watered. It was very scary for us. We did have what we called a bonus well that had a slow trickle of water that would come out of it that was not tied into our household well. And so we filled up 5-gallon jugs. We used to live in a cabin where we didn't have water, so we would have to go to a spring to get water. And so we filled, I don't know, there were maybe 12 or 15 of these 5-gallon jugs, and we would fill that. It would take all day. And then we would target the water for the greenhouse. That was the first priority, the veggie garden, and the new plantings. But other things, they got ignored. Now, then fortunately, we were able to tap into a drilled well that was abandoned by former neighbors. So we were able to tap into that. We've now got a system that's going to be really fantastic this year to store water so that we can pump that from a drilled well when we have the solar, and when we know that there's plenty of water, then we store 1,500 gallons, and that will take care of us. So we feel like the stress of the water situation is basically over. We're not going to be tapping into our dug well that's only 12 feet deep to irrigate everything. It was pretty stressful. quite
Yeah.
honest. Yeah.
You. This person wants to know what you think of garden mats.
Garden mats, M-A-T-S.
Yeah. M-A-T-S.
I guess for mulch, or I guess
I'm not sure.
could that person be unmuted and
Yeah. Or maybe clarify in chat.
yeah.
In the meantime, someone says, what's the purpose of the cardboard if it degrades and is gone in less than a year?
Great question. It kills what's under it because it blocks the sun and so the plants that were under it can't grow, and then other things grow into it, and that holds everything in place.
Okay. Learning a lot about cardboard.
I love cardboard.
Do you worry about the fresh grass clippings burning your crops?
Nope, it's never been a problem because, so yeah, it's never been a problem. I do worry about like too much compost. Too much compost will burn crops. Ash, can't put ash near seedlings or really any plants. You want to put that on soil that gets soaked in. Ash is really alkaline and it will burn plants very quickly.
Okay, I'm gonna write that down. This question, how do you get rid of wild violet weed that spreads like crazy?
Wild violet weed, I love. I think wild violets are beautiful. They're edible, the leaves and the flowers. And I transplant them to provide a living mulch under a lot of our forest garden that we're building, so that I won't have to be mulching all the time in that area. You know, wild violets, we choose your battles. I love violets.
Hi,
Laura, this is Tammy. I asked that question because they're coming up in everything. They're coming up in my chives. They're everywhere. And I just find them to be very intrusive.
Yeah. Sorry, Tammy.
I know.
You know, so it's really interesting. One person's weed is another person's, treasure. And so you choose your battles. I mean, you can start again with the cardboard, like I did with the milkweed, which I love milkweed, but I didn't want, all that milkweed in that one garden.
Okay.
And so there's absolutely, I totally get it. There's a time and a place for everything.
And then I was also the one that asked the question about the garden mats, but I couldn't figure out how to unmute at first.
No worries.
So I have garden mats on my garden.
What are they?
Which they're mats, they last for years, and you just lay them down and then they've got the holes for the planting.
Okay.
So it's basically to keep weeds down.
Okay.
Does cardboard do that? Is that your purpose for the cardboard too, or?
Yes.
So you've never heard of it, so I was wondering if it was, if you thought that was a good alternative if you didn't use cardboard.
So cardboard is free, and I have my moments when I'm really cheap, and we get a lot of cardboard because especially these days everybody's buying everything, getting UPS deliveries. I know of some mats that are like made from recycled tires or recycled plastic, that block everything out. And so it's great from that perspective. It lasts for a long time. I don't like single-use plastic. I would worry about it breaking down in the sun, that you'll wind up with little teeny pieces, what they call microplastics, breaking up and going into the soil. And that's a huge problem, across the planet. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if it's a way to reuse plastics, to pull them out of the waste stream, to make it into something and reuse it again, then yeah, go for it. Everybody is going to do things slightly differently, and it's not my place to say yay or nay. It's just, these are my experiences.
Thank you.
If it works, go for it, Tammy.
Well, I don't see any more questions, but I actually have a question for you, Laura. Beautiful pile of mulch that I was saving, and I put a sheet of plastic over it, and then unbeknownst to me, the whole thing degraded, and it's in tiny pieces. I mean, tiny little pieces of plastic over the winter. It broke down.
Yeah.
Toss that out, or can I just use it and knowing there's plastic in there?
Yeah, so if it's starting to break down, it's going to break down more, and then you're going to have little pieces of plastic everywhere, and that just drives me personally a little bonky. So yeah, I would say get rid of it. I mean, that's why we don't use plastic mulch personally, because we wind up, you know, I tried that in Nashua and it was very frustrating to me. And so and then, you know, then the gardens went feral because I wasn't maintaining things that way. And so I had to come up with something different. And the grass clippings, we had the resource, and so we're going to use it.
Right.
Other people use straw, you know. I think straw is great, but it's got weed seeds in it sometimes. So in order for it to really work well, you need to layer it on very thick. And then sometimes when that gets layered on really thick and you get a tremendous wind like we do all the time, then it will lift it all up as sort of a magic carpet. And that can be a little frustrating or scary.
Okay.
I love grass clippings.
Yeah. And we have one final question here. I see that we're over time, but again, you can put questions on the Facebook page and we'll make sure.
Yeah.
The last question is, what is your forest garden plan? We want to hear about the forest garden.
Forest garden plan. So again, we live on a hillside and with awful soil. And so when we had the Veg Mahal building built, there was a lot of excavation that happened, and we had these great terraces built for us. And so the forest garden is an idea where you have plant material on every level. So you can have root crops, you can have vines, you can have ground covers like violets that Tammy doesn't like. And you can have bushes and trees, and they're grown compact near each other, more than a normal orchard would be, for example, because that's how a forest actually works. And so then you wind up with this whole new kind of environment that takes care of itself. It's a really cool idea. And so we're setting that up as an orchard for, you know, it'll be producing only for part of the year, but it will be a diversified types of fruit so that we have a diversified diet, fruit wise. And there's some great books. I just read a really wonderful book by a guy named Martin Crawford on forest gardening. It's a big book, but it was really quite motivating. And we got our forest garden started 3 years ago. Just got it started with little whips from the New Hampshire State Nursery, and those whips have turned into bushes already. We've got trees growing at this point, and this year we're adding to it. We've got a whole big shipment from the company called Fedco of fruit trees, and so we're putting some of those in now, and using that Hugel trench concept that I talked about. And the hope is in 5 years, it will be producing fruit, you know, apples and peaches and blackberries and service berries and pears. And well, we are already getting pears, mulberries. It's just it's a whole variety of things. Does that answer the question? I hope.
Absolutely. Yeah, sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Laura. This was awesome.
You're welcome. It's
Everyone.
Wonderful to see a lot of familiar, wonderful faces.
And please, people, help support more programs like these, and maybe we can get Laura to come back. So Facebook Little Gardens NH, and maybe Laura, we can post on our Facebook site some of your favorite books, like the one you're mentioning on the forest gardens.
Yeah, absolutely. Be
Yeah.
careful what you wish for. I love garden books.
We'd love to see your favorites.
Excellent.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you so
For your
much.
support.
Thank you. It was great.
Yay.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Take care.